Lord Mackay, thank you for accepting my request. You need no introduction. You've been appointed to the Faculty of Advocates in 1955, to the Queen's Council in 1965, Lord's Advocate in 1979 when you were appointed as a peer in the House of Lords, and in 1987 you were tipped to replace the great Lord Hailsham as a Lord Chancellor.
Strictly speaking, Lord Havers became the Lord Chancellor just after the general election. And then his health broke down and he resigned in October 1987, and I was appointed to succeed him. So Lord Havers was in between Lord Hailsham and myself.
But no one has heard of him. So
Well, he was the Attorney General for a long time.
General. And then you were the only child in your family, and you come from a very humble background. Would you take us through your childhood?
Well, I went to school in Edinburgh, a school just beside my parents' home, and it was a primary school. And then at 11 I think it was, I went to George Heriot School, which was a school founded by the man who came from Scotland with James VI and First of England as his treasurer, really, and he amassed sufficient to leave a foundation in a school which was set up in 1628 and has endured ever since. It was a grant-aided school in the time when I knew it first, and then it was changed. It became fully independent, but I was fortunate enough to gain a scholarship and bursaries all the time I was there, except the very first year. And so I was educated by the school, really, in funding as well as in teaching. And then I went from there in 1944 to Edinburgh University, and I was a student of mathematics and what they called natural philosophy, which for me was really mathematical physics. And I had very distinguished professors. Professor Sir Edmund Whittaker was my professor of mathematics, and Max Born, who was well known as an international...
Went on to become a very internationally well-known mathematician.
He was very well known internationally. He was the mathematical physics professor. So I had very, very good tuition, and I got a good degree in 1948. And
from
then,
St Andrews?
Well, at Edinburgh University.
Yes.
And then in St Andrews, what happened was I was then eligible for the National Service, which was still operating, and I and a colleague were called to the Joint Recruiting Board and told that there was a shortage of teachers of mathematics in the universities because the ex-servicemen were coming back and there was a great demand for mathematical teaching, and accordingly we were asked if we would apply for the vacancies in the Scottish system for mathematical teaching, and I was appointed in the University of St Andrews, and I stayed there for 2 years. I had already obtained an open scholarship to Trinity College, Cambridge, but you couldn't take it up until after you've
and you graduated in 1952.
1948 I graduated
from Trinity College.
Then I came to, I graduated from Trinity in 1952, and then I decided to change over to law, and I graduated in law in Edinburgh in 1955, and that's the year I became a member of the Faculty of Advocates. As you say, I took silk in 1965, and then I was elected Dean of the Faculty in 1976.
Till 1979 when you were appointed.
That's right, and I was the Dean when I was appointed as Lord Advocate to my intense surprise. But anyway, I felt, having been asked, I ought to take it. And I did that, and I was Lord Advocate for 5 years. Then I became a judge of the Court of Session and the High Court of Judiciary in Scotland. And then a year after that, I was appointed a Lord of Appeal in Ordinary. So I came here to the House of Lords as one of the Scottish judges on the Appellate Committee. And then in 1987, in October 87, I was invited to become the Lord Chancellor on the resignation of Lord Hayward. And I remained in that position from 1987 to 1997, when I was 70, almost 70, and retired then from being the Lord Chancellor. In any case, the government changed, and Lord Urban of Laird became the Lord Chancellor.
That's right. And in 1987, how surprising was it for you to become the Lord Chancellor and to continue to build up on the legacies of the former, aside from that one who had to retire, but on the legacies of Lord Hayward, who was the Chancellor for nearly 9 years?
He was...
For 8 years.
8 years and then 4.
And then 4.
4. And, well, it was a terrific surprise to me to be invited to become the Lord Chancellor. And I decided to take it on.
Yes, there was a scandal just shortly after that you got appointed when you attended a memorial service of one of your colleagues.
No, that was actually before I became the Lord Chancellor. I attended the memorial service of the late peer, who was a close friend of mine, in the sense that I had appeared before him often and had found his way of conducting appeals very congenial. And my church objected to that. After I became Lord Chancellor, they got to know of it and started proceedings, and eventually decided that I shouldn't continue in communion with the church. They decided that, and I accepted that, and I've gone to other places.
But you had many peers who were on your side, including Lord Rees-Mogg and Lord Hutchinson. There were a few of them who spoke out in favour of your case.
But anyway, that was the church wasn't particularly amenable to listening to anybody else, and they decided that, and I just accepted their decision and moved on.
And before, it was the duty of the role of Lord Chancellor, it was very much clerical, like in the past, 1,000 years ago, only clerics, and it's only like in modern times that lawyers, they become Lord Chancellors. So would you explain us the transition?
Well, they were lawyers for a long time. There was a sort of clerical aspect in the very early days, but of course it's the oldest public office in the United Kingdom. There was the Lord Chancellorship, and it changed a bit as time went on, but it was, by the time I knew anything about it, it had become very much a lawyer's function, if you like, and it was very much a question of being responsible for the judicial system anyway, the court system, and also for aspects of the law which were not already the responsibility of other departments. Like, for example, the criminal law was in the ambit of the Home Office, but divorce law and family law to a very considerable extent was in the Lord Chancellor's department. And one of the first major pieces of legislation I was involved in was the Children Act, which became the Act of 1989, which has been a very strong structural provision for children ever since. It's been modified somewhat, but its main structure has remained, I'm glad to say.
And before 1987, you weren't affiliated to any political party, and then you had to become a Conservative member.
Well, I didn't have to because one of my predecessors, some of my predecessors as Lord Advocate were not followers of the politics of a particular government. But I didn't take part in party politics very much, although my pupil master was a candidate for the Tory Conservative Party in a general election when I was his pupil. But I was involved in, as I said, rather public office in the Faculty of Advocates, and I felt that it wasn't appropriate there to adopt a political stance because the faculty was an independent body, independent of government, and should provide services to any party that needed it. And therefore I didn't become, although I was sympathetic to the Conservative Party for all my life practically, I didn't have to become a member. But once I became the Lord Advocate, it was clear that I had a political connection, and I decided that I would take on the political, avow the political connection that I had.
But for a second, let's suppose that it was either Mr. Wilson or Mr. Callaghan who would offer you the role of Lord Chancellor. Would you have still joined the Labour Party?
Well, that hadn't happened. I mean, the people that appoint law officers have a pretty good idea of what they want. And
since Margaret Thatcher appointed you?
Yes, I mean she appointed me, and she rang up on the Monday after the election. And actually I had an extraordinary experience that a colleague of mine met my wife and myself in Marks and Spencer's on the Friday. The election was on the Thursday, you remember. And Margaret Thatcher won the election. As the Conservative Party won the election, and this gentleman, a friend of ours, a member of the faculty, said to me, "I hear you're going to be the Lord Advocate." I said, "Well, that's strange, I haven't heard that myself." Anyway, I heard it by the Monday.
Yes. And how was it to work with Margaret Thatcher and be part of a party cabinet?
Well,
government.
I didn't become a member of the cabinet until I became the Lord Chancellor. The Lord Advocate is a law officer of the Crown, like the Attorney General, except he was for Scotland. In these days, he was a member of the UK government, but principal responsibilities in Scotland, and it was a great privilege to work with Margaret Thatcher. As you may remember, in the time when I was Lord Advocate, there were very considerable discussions with the European Union, particularly about the contribution that the UK had to make to it. And Margaret Thatcher...
Fontainebleau Conference in 1984.
Yes.
And they accepted her rebate.
Yes, that's right. And that was, the preceding years involved a good deal of dispute, and the thing that I remember particularly about Margaret Thatcher, and she took advice from both our law officers, the Attorney General and myself, usually joint advice from us about these matters. She was absolutely determined that she wouldn't do anything which was contrary to the law, and some people wanted her to withhold contributions, you see, forcibly, when we were still due them. She said, "I won't do that. I will see whether I can get change." And I think it's one of the most remarkable compromises that I know of in my career, that here was a single lady arguing with people who are all interest the opposite to hers. They were all anxious that Britain would pay as much as possible because that reduced their contribution, or had that tendency anyway. And yet she managed to persuade them freely and by agreement.
By her own convictions.
By her convictions and the strength of her advocacy. And I mean, she had a good case, there's no doubt about that, and they accepted it. It was remarkable.
And what was the transition between Margaret Thatcher to John Major in terms of leadership aspects of the job? Which one were you more comfortable to work with?
Well, I was comfortable to work with both. They had different circumstances. By the time John Major was there at the beginning, of course, he was
damaged by the issue of Europe in his.
Well, the problem was that after the election, after the general election that he won, I think some people thought unexpectedly, but anyway, he won it. He had a very small majority, and there were a lot of people there who were very different to his point of view, so he had a difficult time, but he was an extremely skillful and very straightforward operator. And one of the things he did, and I think it's important to realise that, he had managed to really do a lot of negotiation in the Northern Irish situation, and I think if it hadn't been apparent that he was going to lose the general election, they might have been able to carry that through. But Patrick Mayhew, who was a colleague of mine, he'd been
Northern Ireland Secretary for 5 years.
He'd also been the Attorney General when I was Lord Chancellor, and in these days, at the beginning anyway of my time as Lord Chancellor, the law officers handled the business of the Lord Chancellor in the Commons, because there was no other minister. The Lord Chancellor was the only minister in the Lord Chancellor's department, and so my business in the Commons was handled by the law officers, including Patrick Mayhew and
who sadly passed away over summer last summer.
Yes, sadly he did. And I was at his memorial service. It was a very beautiful tribute which John Major paid him.
And to what extent do you think that your role, that the role that you took up as the Lord Chancellor, it's been politicised lately?
Yes, it's been completely altered. I mean, the Lord Chancellor is no longer has any judicial responsibility whatsoever. The present Lord Chancellor has responsibility for the court service, of course, but she has no judicial responsibility whatsoever, and she has no place in the House of Lords either, which I was the Speaker of the House of Lords.
Yes.
The senior
I was going to come up to that one, that went with the constitutional reforms that they were undertaken under Tony Blair in 1999. They fused these two rules together. No, actually, they separated these two rules. So do you think that it's a shame that these two they got separated?
Well, it's not for me to say what's best for everybody in this situation, but it's certainly extremely different, and I think it's quite a different situation for the judiciary. For one thing, the Lord Chancellor was the person responsible for nominating judges. And I was extremely careful in how I did that. I may just mention as an aside that the Lord Chancellor had the responsibility of nominating the top judges in Northern Ireland. And when I went there first in 1987, there was a pressure from the Irish government to have a part to play in the appointment of judges in Northern Ireland. Now, I wasn't prepared to have that because I felt I had the responsibility and I should discharge it. And I had the responsibility of appointing the Lord Chief Justice in Northern Ireland. The Prime Minister gave her opinion, but ultimately the responsibility of the appointment or the nomination to the Queen was on me. And I was extremely careful. And I'm glad to say that through the time I was there, which was almost 10 years, there was no complaint from the Irish government against any judicial appointment that I made. And I think of all the institutions in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, the one that was respected as much as any, and possibly more than any, was the judiciary. And I think that was extremely important. Before I went, a Lord Justice had been killed, and about the time of my appointment, one of the judges' homes had been blown up, and it was pretty tense. But anyway, the situation was such that there was no deaths of judges during my time, for which I'm extremely glad. I think that they had the confidence of both sides of the community in Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland. And so do you think that now that Lord Speaker is Norman Fowler and the Lord Chancellor is Liz Truss, and so do you think that these two, they must coordinate together on a regular basis?
No, not really. I mean, there's no... The Lord Chancellor is now the Secretary of State for Justice, and her role is really completely distinct from that of the Speaker of the House of Lords. And of course the other thing that's happened is that she is no longer a judge. The Lord Chancellor hasn't been a judge since that reform, and the result is that...
Is it a shame? Is it a shame?
Well, I prefer to leave that to others to decide, because
they have like a more impartial view, and it's more likely that they are more impartial rather than just be playing party politics.
Well, the judges never played party politics in my time, and no judge was appointed in my time on account of any political connection.
We could... Hi.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
We booked the room.
The room? Okay, could you give us 2 minutes? Or...
We need to set up a film crew though. So
Okay.
It really needs to be 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. We will. Thank you. That's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So, and last question on Brexit. It's a very vast issue. We can't go through for 2 minutes. But just tell us about your thoughts now. About the legal implications.
Well, I think the legal
future.
implications are pretty obvious, and to come out of the European Union, exactly on what terms are to be determined, and also to what extent we have to contribute as a result of coming out to the finances of the European Union for the future is an interesting and important question.
Do you think that we will still be an important country to do free trades with?
Oh yeah,
European
we're an
Union.
important country, but the question of what our relationship with the European Union will be in the future is a very difficult one, and that I think is the negotiations which have to start and be conducted, and I must give every support I can to the government to try and get the best deal that they can. Okay.
Thank you very much, Lord Mackay, for your time. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you brought me here. I've never been here before.
Yeah.